All right, our pal Cheryl Toomey is back, and she says, okay, you are given a chance to change the outcome of one event in history. What event would it be? And you're also given a chance to change one event in your personal past. What would it be? That's a super question. I think about the first one a lot more than I think about the second one. And sometimes the answer is just really surprising. I think if I could change one thing, sometimes I think I would change the passage of the 17th Amendment. I would do that. I would, or I would, I don't know. See, when you start thinking about getting in there with individuals, you run into one of the great debates really about history in general, and it's a great man theory. So you would think, oh, I'd go back and kill Hitler. Well, first of all, if that would do it, and I could go back and kill somebody, I wouldn't kill Hitler, I would kill Lenin. Because Lenin led to Stalin, and it was far worse. It went on for 50 years instead of 15 or 20. But the problem is that if you go back and undo Lenin, or you kill Lenin before he grows up, or Marx or Stalin or all the rest, the question is, would society produce another one? And I suspect they probably would. Guys like Hitler and Stalin and all these villains are like little pachinko balls that fell into a slot that was waiting for them. And I don't know that if you take that particular ball out of the mix, whether some other ball wouldn't get in there and be... We can just use statistics, right? We can just use the laws of probability and bell curves and imagine that while there are people that could have filled the slot that Hitler took, some of them could have been a much better person than Hitler. We have to assume that some of them could have been much worse either. Unless the slot was self-selecting for what we would call evil, that's a possibility too. So if I had to do anything, I think I would probably go back, and if I could do one thing, certainly if I could do one thing today legally, do one thing, not time traveling, it would be to repeal the 17th Amendment, because 17th Amendment took the power away from the states. States losing power concentrated it in the federal government. Federal control of power is what led to one-party rule in this country, and one-party rule in the news media in New York, and one-party rule in the Dream Machine out here in Los Angeles. So it seems like an odd thing to almost like to waste that wish on. But I don't. As I said, I think the big things are bigger than individuals. I like to think that's true. Although, you read the history of the Soviet Union, it's very hard to imagine. Who could have done to those people what Lenin did. The Kerensky government, the revolution in 1917, the Russian Revolution was actually a two-part revolution. And in February, there was a revolution against the Tsar, and a provisional government headed by Kerensky took over. And it was trying very hard to be a democracy. I mean, they had a parliament, and they were talking about elections, and they were talking about all this stuff. They were going to try and honor their obligations in World War I. And it was just this little tiny flowering of an actual future for Russia that probably would have made it very similar to, it would have put it on the track to where Europe is instead of on the murderous track that it went today. But Lenin basically came back to Russia after the Kerensky government was in power. Lenin wasn't there for the first revolution. Trotsky was, but Lenin wasn't. Lenin was somewhere in Germany, I guess. And he was chased out and sent to Finland, I think. Whatever the case may be, he wasn't there. And he came back, and he basically launched a second revolution against the revolutionaries. The Tsar is gone, the Russian Revolution, people are free. For about 8 months, they were actually free. They were genuinely free. They had a tremendous constitution. They were working all this stuff out, and Lenin says, we're not going to cooperate with this government. The revolution's going to be a Bolshevik revolution. And he simply didn't give up, so the Bolsheviks overthrew the revolutionary government of Kerensky, which was on its way to doing all of the liberal reforms that Tsar Alexander II put in place and was killed for. They were on their way, and Lenin came in pretty much single-handedly and stole it. And Trotsky, who ought to know, was there, and he said the revolution never could have happened without Lenin. So if I could prevent one thing in history, I suppose that would be it. I would probably try to save as many lives as I could, and not just deaths. I mean, just what communism and Bolshevism really did to not just the Russian nation, but what Bolshevism did to the Chinese people and what it did to the Eastern European people. And it's just incredible, the damage that was done by that theory. I wouldn't change the theory because there was an awful lot of genuinely awful conditions at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So if Marx hadn't written that book, I think somebody else would have. But Lenin appears to have been the fulcrum, and you can barely imagine an American Revolution without George Washington, but I don't think you can imagine a Russian Revolution without Lenin, and that was the worst thing that happened in history, in my opinion. You thought I was going to dodge the last one, didn't you? But I'm not. If I had to change one event in my personal past, what would it be? That's a really tough one. I'm honestly stumped about this because God knows there's a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things that I wasn't happy about when they happened, but I don't regret a single thing. There's not like, oh, if I'd only done this. That doesn't. I'm tempted to say I wish I'd gotten smarter about all this conservatism stuff earlier, because if I had, I do feel like I started so late that sitting here in this chair at 57 years old, I wish I had more time. But it's been pointed out to me by people that know me better than I do that the time I spent out there just wandering in the wilderness, and it was pretty sad, and pretty scary. I look back on my life, I thought, I lost half of my life or more. 20, 30 years are gone. I have no memory of my 20s or my 30s, and I didn't remember much of the 40s until I got to be about 45, 46. When I started doing Eject, that's really when I kind of, got back into the world. Rhonda Renee knows my life story. She says I would have gotten fighter pilot eyeballs. I thought about that too. I've thought about that too, Rhonda. And needless to say, I went down with our friend Foghorn, who's watching right now, as Viper 6. And I got to hang out with actual fighter pilots and, and see the world that I really wanted. And once I met actual fighter pilots, once I sat with these guys and talked with them for hours, I realized, thank God I'm not a fighter pilot. These are the worst people I've ever met in my life. They're hardly the worst people I ever met in my life, however. I am part of that world. I like to be part of that world, as I've said 100 times on this show. Going down there and getting my squadron name, my call sign of Skid, was the best day I ever had. So I can be a part of that world, and I love to hang out with them. There's our man Foghorn right there. But at the same time, if I'd only done that, I wouldn't have been able to do the things I do now. The things I do now are the result of starting off with a kind of a warrior attitude about things. For 12 hard, solid years of preparing myself for the Air Force Academy. I mean, I knew everything about U.S. weapons systems, and I mean all of them, not just Air Force ones. I knew everything about the Soviet inventory and physics, astronomy, all this stuff. So all this kind of hard science stuff I got. And then the vision thing went south, and so that was a catastrophe. It just shattered all the plans. I get into the theater department. I'm hanging out with all these, fawns and, dancers and actors and actresses and very exciting and very glamorous and very interesting. And that's when I kind of realized I had some storytelling gifts. Gifts is too strong a word. Storytelling abilities, I guess. So if I had to pick one thing, I swear to God, you know how honest I've been during the show, nothing comes to mind. I can't think of a single thing where I just go, damn it, I wish I hadn't done that. I can think of a couple little things. Like, I wish I hadn't backed up my car with, 7-8 months ago and not seen the little wall that was not visible in my mirrors. It scratched up the back of my bumper. I regret that somewhat. But I really just honestly don't know what I would have done differently. I take it back. I do definitely take it back. If I could change one thing in my personal past, it's got nothing to do with me in terms of how I turned out. But if I had to do anything in my personal past, I would go back 25, 30 years, and I would take back our family's decision to get my mom out of a job that she didn't like. And we decided that she was working and had been working real hard, and that she'd taken care of all four of us, until like serious adulthood by herself. And then she was working at this job she didn't like very much, and the four of us got together and said, she's been working her tail off. Let's just get her out of there. Let's just pay for her rent, and let's pay for her bills. And she says she's always wanted to be, working in the theater, and she's always wanted to, travel and all that stuff. Let's just make that happen. So we did. And what happened was she went to the theater once, and my mom was very shy, and she liked it, but she just never went back to volunteer at the theater, and she didn't travel, and she didn't do any of those things. And what she ended up doing was just staying alone in this apartment that we were paying for, talking to her dog for 20 years, and that enormously accelerated her mental decline, her Alzheimer's, and the dementia. I have no doubt whatsoever that it was 20 years of isolation that was really responsible for getting this as bad as it was, as quick as it was, because her younger brother, my Uncle Ted, is 1 year younger than her. 1 year. They're identical. In fact, there's pictures of me and when I was 17 and Ted when he was 17. We look exactly the same. But Ted is a gas turbine engineer. He lectures on jet engines, and he to this day, he's got to be 85? Ted goes around and lectures to young 25, 30-year-old engineering students from China and Dubai and Australia and everywhere else. And he'll stand in front of the class. He's got 8,000 slides memorized. And he'll just start talking, he'll say the JP75J engine has a maximum rated thrust of 67,000 pounds and consumes this many gallons of fuel at this many RPMs, and it's just all in his head. So since they're biologically identical, Ted is sharp as a tack because Ted's been using his brain actively and constantly interacting with people, and my mom had done just the opposite, and all of her social interactions went away, and that's I think that's what I would change. Yeah. Merlin Magus says, Bill and Ted, I never thought about that before. Can you believe that? How could I have missed that? Yeah, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. We've had a few, actually. I spent 7 days in Thailand for his birthday, his 80th birthday back in 2012, and man, it was something. So that's the answer to that. Let's see. Marisol Balderas asks, thank you. It's the UR show. You are a conservative 18-year-old who is running for Justice of the Peace in Fort Bend County, Texas, against a complacent establishment candidate who has been unopposed for many years and for whom most people are likely to vote. How do you run your campaign? P.S. My brother is actually in this situation and could use a lot of advice. Okay, Marisol and brother, let's. This is a great question. So let's start at the bottom. It's not going to be terribly tough to answer, but it's a great question. Youth, in any particular job, youth and energy can either be attractive or they can be considered dangerous depending on the job and depending on how it's packaged, just like any other idea. A lot depends on the packaging. Now, 18 years old is extremely young. In fact, 18 years old has certainly got to be the legal minimum for this job. So the first thing you have to understand is, what is it that a Justice of the Peace does? What do they do? What is it that they do? And first thing I would do is I would get 5 or 6 bullet points, and I mean you should be able to get this out in 30 seconds. Why you are capable of doing, physically capable, forget about the moral argument, we'll get to that in a minute. Why are you capable of doing what the Justice of the Peace does? Because your first hurdle is going to be convincing people that you can do the job. That's number one. Can you do the job? Do you have the experience to do the job? So you have to make that case. I can do the job, and here's why. Get that quickly out of there. Then you have to talk about your opponent's age and lassitude and all of his inertia and his laziness, and you can't make it personal. You can't put him down, because you're going to be selling charms. What you're going to be doing, you're going to be trying to charm people into winning this office, and so you can't degrade the guy and you can't throw mud at him, but you can say, listen, he's had this position forever, and I understand how this works. Believe me, I may be young, but I understand how it works. When you're in the same position forever and you feel like you just are not going to lose the job, you end up doing less and less and less. It's just human nature. Anybody would do that in their position. And now you get to really hit them, right? Now you get to bring in the right cross. Then you basically make the case, say, listen, I'm obviously young, but as you can see, I'm capable of doing the job. And by the fact that I've mentioned that the problem with him is simply that he's in a rut that he can't get out of because he doesn't have to. I hope that indicates some small measure of wisdom of how people work. And what I would like to do is I would like to apply my energy to making the Office of Justice of the Peace for this county, number one, up to what it's supposed to be, and number two, to do it as efficiently and as frugally as possible, so we spend as little of your money as we possibly can. You throw a decent smile in there with that, and you're going to have a hard time losing that election. I've talked about this before. I keep saying that. I've talked about everything before. There's nothing more appealing to a person that owns a business than to have somebody young come in and be enthusiastic but disciplined. Enthusiastic, ready to work, but disciplined. Well, how much are you asking for? Sir, I'm not asking you to pay me anything. I'm happy to work for you for 2 weeks for no pay at all. And if it turns out that you're happy with the work we do, then we can have a conversation about the pay after that. But I'm more than happy to come in and reduce your risk. And I'd be happy to work for 2 weeks without pay to show you that I can do this, because I'm quite convinced that I can. Nobody turns that down. Nobody turns that down. Nobody. Most people, certainly if it were me, I would say, I might take you up on that. And then you work for 3 days, and you do a good job. It's like, there's no way I cannot pay you. Of course I'll start paying you. I'll pay you more than I would have paid you if you hadn't made the offer. So enthusiasm and youth are a tremendously attractive thing to people, especially older people, if it is wrapped in a beautiful little parcel, and that little parcel is called respect. You have to show respect. You have to show respect to the voters, you have to respect the voters, and you have to respect your opponent. Because if you don't show your opponent respect while you're making the case against him, you're going to look like a whippersnapper. You're going to look like some kid who's just, so you're going to look like Bill Clinton, I got to get political office. So I would say a couple things. First of all, can you do what the job requires? Make that a very fast. That should be 10 seconds to convince people that you've got the background to do that. Explain why you think that see, here's really what I'm getting at is, why are you running? You've got, everything comes down to stories, okay? It's all a story. What is your story? Why are you doing this? It's very unusual for an 18-year-old to run for Justice of the Peace, so why are you doing it? And take it from there, and tell the truth about why you're doing it, because people can tell when you're lying. And for an 18-year-old to be running for Justice of the Peace in Texas is an unusual thing for an 18-year-old to be doing. So why are you doing it? I'm going to be later on downstream in a couple of weeks, probably once I get some of this stuff out of the way. I'm going to be putting together some help for some people I know from Russia. And they came here. They came here from Russia to open a ministry. They felt called to come here and help other Russians down here. And I'm gonna help these people because I know them and I think they're good people. But their story is, these are people who, I don't know if you knew this or not, but in Russia, they passed a law not too long ago that says you cannot say the name Jesus Christ, you cannot mention religion, you can't talk about religion, forget about, ministering to people. You simply can't talk religion unless you're in a church. You're not allowed to. It's against the law to talk about religion to anybody unless you're in a church. And they said, we can't live like that. So they came here. And their story is, this is what America is all about. These people are immigrants. They're here legally. They paid the price, and they're standing in line. They've gotten everything correct with immigration. They're here on a purpose. They work like slaves. They sleep on mattresses and eat rice. They're here because of a passionate belief in forces of good. They're ready to work very, very hard and to not only obey the laws of this country. They're here because they love this country, and they love the freedom that's here, and they're amazed at the quality of the American people and how friendly they are and how open they are. And that's the story of those people. Those people's story is the story of immigration done right today. It's the story that basically negates the idea that Republicans or conservatives are anti-immigrants. We're not anti-immigrants. We're anti-lawbreakers. We're anti-illegal immigrants. So I'm going to sell them as what they are. I'm not going to lie. I'm just going to tell their story. And their story is, these people are here and they need some help. And I met the couple, and the pastor is a terrific guy named Alexei Sasha, and his wife Slava. And they went out on their first date. He was the youth minister, and she thought he was cute. And they went out on a date. They're very close in age. And at the end of their first date, he said, if we're going to go on a second date, then we're probably going to get married. And if we get married, you need to know that I'm a minister, and that life is not going to be easy, and that it's going to be filled with some real hardships and a lot of poverty for a while. But I feel like we're doing God's work, and I feel like I need to tell you that now because I really like you. How do you not buy into a story like that? I mean, that's exactly what it's about. So yeah, just get your story together, Marisol's brother. And again, make it. You can go with enthusiasm, but wrap it in respect, because youthful enthusiasm, hard work, and respect, you're done. There's nobody turns that down. Nobody.